Now it's ready. Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm bringing you the knitting book tag. This tag was created by my friend Cara from the channel Wild Book Garden, who I'll have linked in the description box below, along with the questions in case these are ones you would like to answer yourselves. 2023 really became kind of the year of yarn work for me. In addition to doing a tremendous amount of writing and working on my thesis, I wanted a hobby that would take up a lot of like fidgety hand energy that I tend to gain when I'm sitting still for a longer period of time. And knitting kind of fit the bill right away, especially because a couple of my friends in real life were already really good knitters and fantastic teachers. I knew a little bit about knitting from like early childhood, like ages 8, perhaps even earlier, but that all kind of got lost in the wayside. But of late, I've picked up knitting and crochet, and I've made some really fun, interesting stuff that I might include pictures of in the ether around my head. I got so into it that I decided that while I wasn't doing like booktube and stuff, I was still going to record my reading progress in something of a reading scarf. This was my 2023 attempt, organized by genre, age range, format of reading. Unfortunately, I did not factor in how difficult it would be to write a thesis and keep up with literally any sort of hobby at all, so my reading scarf is really far behind, so I will be working on it a little bit while I'm answering the questions to this tag. I missed booktubing tremendously while I was away, so I'm really glad that I get to marry it and my new hobby that I started over the past year at the same sort of time. For that, I can only thank Cara so much. Thank you, my beloved friend. This is going to be so much fun. I can't wait to answer these questions. So without further ado, let's get started and let's see how much progress I can make on catching up with this reading scarf. Question number 1 is cast on. What is the first section of a bookstore or a library or an online bookshop that you scope out? For me, this is a really easy question to answer. I'm always going to gravitate to speculative fiction, whether that's sci-fi or fantasy, occasionally even horror. I'm pretty lucky in that most bookstores tend to group those sorts of books together. It's definitely the section of a bookstore that I feel most comfortable being in. Like, it's the bit where I'm like, oh, like if somebody asked me for recommendations while I was browsing in here, I could do that really easily. I'd be able to like navigate what's on the shelves pretty well. Like, I recognize the authors and tropes that are likely to appear here. I'll never be a stan for anything else as long as sci-fi fantasy is available for me. Question number 2 is knit. Obviously, knitting, the knit stitch, is a staple of knitting. What is a super hyped book that completely delivered for you? For this, I'm gonna have to say N.K. Jemisin's The 5th Season. It just got absolutely everything. It has the complex world building that I love in my sci-fi and fantasy, and I feel like The 5th Season is sort of right down the middle of those two comfort genres for me, which is just an added bonus. But it's a sort of world building that marries both the geographical scene setting sort of world with the people and the societal mores and the sort of cultures that live upon that world. And it explores that world and the sort of things that are happening in it by way of several points of view, all of which are part of a marginalized identity that navigates this world in a particular and very specific way. And on top of those incredible things, the magic is just so cool. If you're a fan of like superhero comics or other elemental magics properties, then it's still going to be a familiar and yet unique way of seeing that sort of thing done. And then the absolute cherry on top is that it is beautifully written. I haven't read the rest of the series, but I'm very excited to as soon as possible. Question number 3 is Purl. This is as important as a knit stitch, but it's probably not as famous. Name a character that deserves more love, and this could be love from fans, from the author, from other characters, etc. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this from the angle of deserves more love from other characters. It's Momo Adachi from the manga Peach Girl by Miwa Ueda. Momo is the protagonist of Peach Girl and is the sort of eponymous Peach Girl. She tans very easily, and because she is a swimmer, her hair kind of bleaches from the chlorine, and because of the combination of those two factors, she ends up, despite being, in high school and a minor, fulfilling an aesthetic that a lot of adult creepy men consider to be one that implies that she is, easy or a slut or whatever. I started reading this, I think when I was like 8, maybe 9 years old. There was an old Croatian bookstore or publisher called Algoritam, and over the summer one year, they had sort of like a book trailer that played literally on TV, and I saw this and I was just like shocked. I was shaken. I was stirred. I was like, I need to pick this up. Like, I need to know what's happening in this like drama-filled world. But Peach Girl really gave me, I think, my first look at sort of systemic sexism and misogyny, particularly as it results to the hypersexualization of younger and younger girls, and how misogyny, both internalized from herself and from other girls around her, and externalized from the men sort of creating this standard for her, make it so that you're basically in like a no-win scenario regardless of what you do. The treatment Momo gets for looking a certain way is just absolutely abhorrent and absurd, especially in the earlier installments of the manga. She's such a sweet girl and a really kind friend, and it really sucks to see her get bullied, but thankfully, because I am familiar with the source material, I know that it's going to end well. By leaps and bounds, she's one of those characters who definitely deserves more love, not just from the characters around her, but from society as a whole. Question number 4 is chart. What is a book or author that you've meant to read but somehow haven't gotten to, and why? I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this in a video earlier this year, but Ava Reed, I think, is the author who most clearly fits the bill for me of author who I think is right up my alley and who I really have meant to read ever since she began releasing stuff, and I just haven't gotten to yet. Per every review I've heard of and every synopsis of everything that they've written so far, their stuff promises to be really atmospheric and dark and just full of a type of storytelling that I particularly am drawn to. So really, it makes no sense as to why I haven't picked up any of their books up till now, until you think about the why half of this question. Though my master's thesis centered a middle grade sci-fi that was pretty lighthearted and fun, alongside that, because I truly can't stop writing, a la Brandon Sanderson, I think I have a problem. The YA manuscript that I've been working on at the same time kind of fits in the Ava Reed mold of atmospheric, darker fantasy with a Eastern Slavic folklore bent to it. And a thing I found about myself, not just in the past year, but sort of ever since I've been a writer who's paid attention to the sort of things that I'm writing, is that I've noticed that when I'm writing, the things that I'm reading cannot be too similar to what I'm writing. I've not found this to be the case when I'm editing. In fact, when I'm editing, I find it, kind of encouraging in a way to be reading within the genres and sort of micro genres that I'm writing in, just because it sort of is like, I know it's shit now, but look what sort of things a book like this can be. But when I'm actually writing, getting the prose down on paper, I can't be reading the same sort of thing. Luckily, that project is in its editing stages now. So Ava Reed, I'm coming for you. I can't wait. And by I'm coming for you, I mean I'm coming to read your books. I can't dethrone you as what you're doing. I can only hope to sort of rub shoulders with you, stand on the shoulders of your giantness as I present my paltry books to the world as well one day, fingers crossed. Question number 5 is double pointed needles. Recommend a series that you can actually read out of order and one that people think you can, but you actually can't. So as far as series that one can read out of order, there are, I guess, a plethora to choose from in the romance genre, but because my brand is fantasy, or at least I'm trying to make it so, I think the Graceling series by Kristen Kishore is one that you can pretty successfully read out of order. They're already sort of written out of chronological order, and they don't follow the same protagonist throughout, so it's a more forgiving series as far as that goes in terms of switching some books around. I am speaking, of course, only about the first 3, Graceling, Fire, and Bitter Blue, as I've not yet continued with the rest of the series, but I'm working on it. And then as far as a series that people think you can read out of order, but you can't, this is a convoluted answer, but I'm gonna go ahead and say The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, but what I'm going to consider out of order here is out of chronological order. I think you should read the books in chronological order, specifically where I felt a little stumbling block in my reading of the series, which has quickly become one of my favorites of all time. So please know that any criticisms levied toward it are not like big and serious. This is clearly just a matter of personal preference. But the 5th novella-length book of the Murderbot Diaries, Fugitive Telemetry, which is the 6th published book, I think you should read it as the 5th book in the series overall, after the sort of quartet of original novellas. That is where it takes place chronologically, and I found that when I read it in release order, I felt that there was almost sort of like a retconning of a lot of the growth that Murderbot had exhibited in the full-length novel that I read prior to Fugitive Telemetry. So Network Effect, which is technically the 5th published book, should be the 6th book that you read. That's the first full-length novel of the Murderbot Diaries. If you are like me and you would prefer to keep your protagonist on a sort of chronological and linear trajectory of sort of understanding their personhood and sense of self-worth and position in their newfound family and the place that they live. Because I read them in the order of release, therefore reading Network Effect before I read Fugitive Telemetry, when I got to Fugitive Telemetry, Murderbot was more stunted and less character developed than it was in the prior books, and I got really confused and kind of sad about it, because there were things that they put up with, certain behaviors and treatment that they dealt with that they just wouldn't have stood for by the end of the previous book. So it threw me off a little bit, and as a result, I think Fugitive Telemetry was my least favorite of the series. However, I think if I read them in chronological order, so not in book release order, I don't know that I would have had that feeling, and I think I might have enjoyed Fugitive Telemetry as much as I enjoyed the rest of the books as well. Question number 6 is cables. Pick a book you heard negative reviews for but ended up loving. The book I'm going to choose for this is The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon. Samantha Shannon has gained a decent amount of book world popularity ever since the release of her high fantasy dragon novel, The Priory of the Orange Tree, and its sequel, A Day of Fallen Night. But before that, she wrote, and is continuing to write, I hope she hasn't abandoned the series, a sort of near-ish future sci-fi dystopia called The Bone Season. And at first there weren't too many people talking about it online, but I feel like retroactively, after Samantha Shannon gained a boom in popularity, I started seeing more and more online about The Bone Season, and I've seen some negative reviews there. So I suppose the caveat for this question, for me at least, is it's been a minute since I read it and I don't know if I agree with myself, but I remember really loving The Bone Season, and I intend to pick it up again because, again, there's at least 1 or 2 books in that series that I own and want to read, so I need to reread the old ones so that I can catch up properly. But yeah, we'll see if upon reread it still holds up, or if I'm a little more in agreement with the people who have been leaving some negative reviews about it. My fingers are crossed that I will still love it, but we'll see. Question number 7 is skein. Why do we still sell yarn like this? And I agree, Cara, it's simply the worst way. Name a trope that you can't stand. This is maybe the question I had to think about the least, and the answer to it for me is girl hate. I can't stand girl hate, especially for no reason, which is usually how it's done. I also can't stand alpha whole men, and I sort of realized that both of those are sort of subdivisions of my truly most hated trope, which is any sort of cis het gender essentialism. No thank you. We do not need to be perpetuating cycles of misogyny and patriarchy in my books. No thank you. No thank you, not for me. It was tired when it was trendy. It's tired now. We can leave it behind. It's a new year. Question number 8 is a gauge swatch. Who is an author who's always a good fit for you? I've never been let down by Susan Dennard. I find her to be a really versatile and varied author. She mainly writes, again, in the sci-fi fantasy space, but within that she tackles some high fantasy, some urban fantasy, more adult sort of stuff like The Witchlands versus more young adult sort of stuff like her Something Strange and Deadly series or The Luminaries. But whatever sort of thing she's tackling, I found her work to be quite atmospheric, really pacey, where there isn't really a lot of page space wasted. If there's action to be had, it's happening and you don't want to get left behind. I think she does a really good job of marrying interiority with external action, and her character interrelationships are always good for me as well. Question number 9 is stitch marker. Share a specific scene that stands out clearly in your mind, but no spoilers. Ooh, okay. So for those of you who've read Gideon the Ninth, if you know, you know. The entirety of the bath scene with Gideon and Hera, you know? If you haven't read it, it's not like that, but it's kind of like that. And if you have read it, you understand. Also in Gideon the Ninth, the scene with, the scene with Gideon and the terrible teens in the bad place, in the hallway of the bad place. Chills, literal chills up and down my spine, and not the good kind. It's just so creepy and so atmospheric. The entire book is, but those 2 scenes stand out in my mind in a big and very intense way. Question number 10 is yarn weight. This is super useful information to take in at a glance. Do you have any bookish taste buddies? And by taste buddies, we mean, do they have a similar taste generally, or it can mean for a specific type of book. So we're not buddies in the sense that she doesn't know I exist, but Sam from the channel Thoughts on Tomes is a booktuber who, if she recommends something, it's something that I can be pretty sure is going to be right up my alley as well. 99.99% of the time, if she likes it, I'm probably going to like it as well. If she recommends it, I'm going to read it. If I've read it and enjoyed it, give it a couple months, it's going to be on her channel as something that she's really enjoyed. So if ever there is a time when my TBR is 0 and I have no idea what to read, I'm just going to make my way to Sam's channel and see if she's got anything listed that I've not tried yet that she enjoys, because odds are I'm going to enjoy it myself too. Question number 11 has the most long-suffering name that I've ever heard, and it's absolutely right. Question is, that novelty yarn someone gifted you because they heard you like knitting, but it's impossible to work with. Name a book that looked perfect for you on paper but didn't work out. And I feel so bad saying this one because I feel like, again, it worked for me so well on paper, but Crier's War by Nina Varela. This and its sequel are 2 books that are in my sort of lost years, so the pandemic years that I wasn't making videos on YouTube. But they are recent enough reads that I still kind of remember being so disappointed when I read them. And it's not a bad duology by any means. I feel like If the synopsis of it intrigues you, you should still give it a try. But if you're a reader like me, definitely temper your expectations. So it's a queer story, which immediately is going to pique my interest a little bit. And it centers a conflict between robots and humans where the robots have sort of taken over and are in charge. So if it had my interest, now it has my full attention. And because one of the protagonists is the maid daughter of the sort of robot king, we also get like a heavy heaping of court intrigue, or at least that was promised. So if it had my attention before, now it had me like chomping at the bit to read it. And all of that just sort of fell flat for me. I read a lot of Cassandra Clare, so you know I don't mind a bit of melodrama, but this had that to the extreme, which felt ridiculously unnecessary because I feel like the stakes in a conflict between humans and a species that just outclasses them so intensely. The stakes are going to be there regardless if you're a human kind of fighting this thing that is bigger and faster and stronger than you. I felt that the book was missing a sort of continuity as far as characterizations went. I felt like each of the characters was either very clever or very dumb in turns, depending on what the story needed it to be, where I was sort of like screaming at the page, like, fucking figure it out. You're supposed to be smart. Like, you're supposed to understand this. There's no like rational or reasonable explanation based on your characterization thus far that you haven't figured XYZ thing out. And then because of the way that the maid, the robots were presented, the revolution of the humans sort of seemed like a moot point. I feel like if you're going to make any sort of resistance possible in this sort of a thing, you need to give them at least some sort of a weakness that can be exploited in some way. And boom, there's your motivation for the other character, the robot character, once they discover this weakness is there, to sort of rally to fix it because that's their people. But we didn't get that. And I feel like the balance was so heavily skewed in one side's favor that when the conclusion of the duology happened and there was sort of like semi-victory for the human, it could only ever feel contrived because there was no basis in reality, the reality presented by the book, for that to even a little bit be possible. And I might sound silly like talking about realism in my fiction, but I feel like when you set up a secondary world, you kind of have to be married to the rules of the secondary world a little bit for it to work properly. It doesn't have to be realistic, but it has to be realistic within the world that you've presented. Within the diegesis, it's got to make sense. And this one didn't. And that really upset me. Prompt number 12 is Scarf. This is the perfect starter project. Recommend a good book for getting into a genre or a type of book. So when I think of a good like gateway book, I think of something, easy or like low barrier to entry to read. I think of like something that's sort of self-sustained, so either a standalone or like a very, very short thing. And I think of something that's well written so that if you're not necessarily into a certain genre, the writing and the quality of the book itself is enough to carry you into this sort of unfamiliar water. So the genre, or I guess subgenre, that I want to be talking about for this prompt is cozy fantasy, and the book I have to recommend is The Enchanted Sonata by Heather Dixon Walwork. So The Enchanted Sonata is a sort of retelling of the Nutcracker, so it's got that familiarity that a retelling brings. It's a story that you already kind of know, even if you don't read this type of thing often. But unlike, the ballet of the Nutcracker, The Enchanted Sonata is very much plot forward, and it's plot forward enough to carry a story through. I feel like cozy fantasy is often a very like vibes based sort of thing where the plot isn't really like the thing you're doing. And there's a lot of like good vibes in The Enchanted Sonata, but because it is very plot forward, because things are happening, have that like comfort and hand holding and training wheels of, okay, even if the vibes are the main bit, we still have something that's carrying us through. The Enchanted Sonata is both relatively short, I think around 300 pages, and it is a standalone novel to the best of my understanding. So if you try it and you don't like it, that's okay. It's not like you're diving headfirst into a series and you have like 10 800-page tomes to read if you want to have a hope in catching up to what the fandom's talking about. It's also like Christmas adjacent, as the Nutcracker always is, but because it's a Christmas story, I feel like people give those automatically a little bit more like cozy vibes cred. So even if you weren't expecting like a cozy fantasy full stop, you're like, okay, it's a Christmas book, it's already going to be a little more cozy. So again, it's like easier to make that transition. And also, in my opinion, it's just a good book. Like, even if you're not interested in this type of genre going forward, it's definitely a book that you can try and enjoy. Even if it's not 100% your cup of tea, I think you'd still find something useful and fun in reading it. Prompt number 13 is socks. Handmade socks are way harder than they look. Don't I know it? Name an underappreciated author who deserves more hype. For this, I'm going to go ahead and say Danielle Clayton. She is the author of many books, including the Bells series, the Marvelers series. She co-authored the Tiny Pretty Things duology, And she co-founded and runs Cake Literary, which is a boutique book packaging company. What I found is true across all of Danielle's works is that she's so smart about writing. She's really a master of kidlit, and I do mean that literally. She has her master's degree in children's literature. But regardless of this education, she's an absolute mover and shaker within the industry. Her books are really, really well paced, and their thematic elements are just to die for. And she's an absolute champion of championing other authors. Another author who deserves far more love is L.L. McKinney, who wrote the A Blade So Black trilogy. She absolutely kills the urban fantasy game. I've not read Legendborn yet, but I feel like a lot of people have read Legendborn, and if you have and you've enjoyed it, I think you should try L.L. McKinney's works next, simply based on what I've heard about Tracy Dion. Prompt number 14 is just name something you really like when it's done in a book. This can be a trope, this can be something about book construction, it can really be anything, just share the bookish love. So from a book construction point of view, I really enjoy it when the books are numbered on the spines, where the series order is pretty clearly delineated. On the very shallow and like aesthetic sort of thing, I really enjoy like a big old sword dike. The main example of this that comes to mind is Gideon from Gideon the Ninth, but I'm also thinking about Ari from Once and Future by Corey McCarthy and A.R. Capetta. If you give me a big old sapphic lady who likes ladies, I'm gold, I'm in. But on perhaps a thing that makes me feral note, I love it when you have a god who fails and must reckon with their failure. I feel like deific or semi-deific entities within books are treated most often in one of two ways. One is the sort of like natural disaster, like force of nature type of way where they're infallible, and even if they do fail, like it doesn't really matter because like they don't get to be held up to human standards anyway. And then the humans or other entities in that book just sort of have to weather the storm, as it were. We also sometimes get the like adopted feral cat version of a god where they're sort of like more human than you would think, and like the point is that despite having an outsized level of power, they are quite human. And I like sort of the middle ground of the two of those, where you have a very, very human force of nature who's fucked up in a big way, but also has to suffer the consequences in a very human way. I just think if they're going to make us suffer, they've got to suffer too, you know? Another type of character that I really find myself drawn to is people who make mistakes while they know and are fully aware that they are making the mistake. And it might not even be classed as a mistake at that point. They might be just doing active harm. I just think that there is a very sort of fascinating element of the human psyche of like, I know it's wrong, but I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to feel guilty about it, but I'm going to keep doing it. And just watching a character grapple with that is ideal. Bonus points if that character also has a bunch of walls up within the narrative and the people around them just kind of consistently misinterpret what they're doing and sort of misinterpret their character and are like, oh, no, you're just terrible, you're awful, you're villainous. And the fucking up character just kind of has to grin and bear it, because to admit the truth would be to admit weakness and bring the walls down, and that is far scarier than anyone thinking that they're just a cruel, awful person. And prompt number 15 is crafting party. The best part of most hobbies is sharing them with friends. Tag some people who craft and who might like these questions. I've been away from BookTube for long enough now that I don't know who's watching my videos or whether they'd be interested in this sort of thing. But I implore you, if any of these questions sounded interesting to you, or if you knit yourself, give Cara's tags some love and answer these questions. You won't be disappointed. They are super fun to noodle about. But while I was answering them, I was doing a very poor job of actually knitting, and I would like to make a little more progress on the scarf, so I'm going to go ahead and call this video here. Once again, a big thank you to Cara for creating the tag. I'll have her and the questions linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave me a thumbs up, and if you like me, maybe consider subscribing to my channel. I post new videos every Thursday, and I would love to have you join my little bookish family. If you choose to do this tag, please tag me in your recreation because I would love to see all of your answers. And because there's an absolute dearth of knitting related emojis, please just leave me your favorite one in the comment section below if you've made it all the way to the end of this video. But overall, that is it from me. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you with my next video very soon. Goodbye!